And if I move 3 inches out of the way, guess what? He says, I moved 3 inches, he's going to come out here and go. Okay. I taught at Bluefield College of Evangelism, helped start it in 1971 for 30 years. The second year of the school, we had to decide who was going to teach the book of Revelation. So we drew straws, and guess who got the straw? So I've been doing this since 1973. Kyle, where are you? Kyle took my class sometime in 97. My goodness. And so if you have any questions, he still remembers everything I taught him. If he does not know the answer, it's because I learned a whole lot when he was in my class. Okay, so I appreciate the invitation to come up here. Couple ground rules real quick. I have been told that I'm like a freight train. I start out real slow, but I get going because I have so much material to cover that the only way to stop a freight train is to reach up and grab that little line, that hits the brakes. The only a dumb question is an unasked question. If you are afraid to ask a question publicly, then just write it down on a piece of paper and give it to me at break when we go back for some refreshments back there. And I will review the first session and we'll answer that question. But the best time to ask the question is when it's fresh on your mind. So don't wait to the end, just raise your hand. I will nod that I saw you raise your hand when we finish that thought. Then if I don't come to you, that means that I've got a senior moment, and I have a lot of those lately. So I'll come back to you, so throw your hand up again. The second thing is, as you came in tonight, you had a handout back there, and this will cover both sessions tonight. When you come in tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, there will be probably 4 or 5 sheets. I recommend you get a little booklet, 3-ring binder, and put these in. We do have these sets back there, and I think they're taping these and maybe going to put them available for the church, like on YouTube, where you'll have your sermons and stuff like that. So you can do that, okay? Now we begin. I feel like a lightning bug that backed into a fan. I am delighted to be here tonight. It goes downhill from there. By the time this night is over, you'll have the Methena shake down real good. It goes something like this. Goodness, those jokes are bad. Something like that, okay? If you came here tonight to this Second Coming seminar, expecting to find, as many preachers advertise, a date for the Second Coming whereby you can know when it is, I got news for you. The one thing that I hate about TV evangelists and others is they must be using the West Virginia calculator. Y'all see it up here? It is a 5-digit calculator. It even has memory in this calculator built in. That's the string memory you put on your finger to remind you of something you're supposed to do. And then notice that it even has the O.J. Simpson clear button at the bottom. If you hear nothing else that I say tonight, please hear this. There are no signs for the second coming whereby any man can discover when it is. It is both heaven's and earth's best kept secret. Only the Father knows when it is. Now that's a pretty dramatic statement, isn't it? And I've got to prove it. By the time you leave here tonight, you will agree with me. There are no signs whereby any man can discover when the second coming is. You will read it from the Bible, from Jesus' own lips himself, recorded for us in Matthew chapter 24. I consider this chapter the hub of teaching concerning the second coming. So if you would, on our first session tonight, what we're going to do is to look at what Jesus said. And we're going to look at this chapter. This is our first session called Matthew 24, Signs of What Times. We're going to look at this chapter under 4 S's. I love alliteration because it helps people remember. First of all, we're going to look at the setting of Matthew 24. Then we're going to look at the signs of Matthew 24. And we'll do that in the next hour, and then we're going to take about a 15-minute cookie and donut break back there, whatever you ladies, I heard y'all texting back and forth and YouTubing it, whatever, I don't know. whatever you're doing, but whatever you fix for us, we appreciate it. We're going to do it and eat it real quick and get back in here. Then the second session, we're going to enter these two other ones, the second coming of Matthew 24 and the separation in a session called Rupturing the Rapture. Okay, you've heard of the rapture, hadn't you? Well, we're going to rupture what the TV evangelists teach you. So these are two big surprises you're going to hear tonight in our first two sessions. So let's look at the first S of Matthew chapter 24. Does anybody know when this chapter was delivered by Jesus? Anybody know? It was delivered during the last week of his life, we believe, on top of the Mount of Olives, Tuesday night, to 3 apostles, written down for our benefit. But what I want you to see is this is the last 7 days of Jesus' life before he was crucified. What happened on Sunday is very important, 2 days before. So if you hold your hand here, maybe like I am going to put a little place there, and then turn your Bibles over to Luke chapter 19, what happened on Sunday of that last week of Jesus' life? We celebrate the week before we call Easter. What's it called? Palm Sunday. Luke chapter 19 records what happened to Jesus. In Luke chapter 19, beginning in verse 41, these are all on your screen and on your sheet. Jesus, remember, is riding a donkey or two, a mother and its foal, that had never ever been ridden before. Any of y'all ever tried to ride a horse that had never been ridden? I did one time, and I saw daylight. I haven't been on one, I don't think, since, because all I saw was the flip of when I kicked him in the side. He reached around and bit me, and that was it. And it was all over. But Jesus is on top of the Mount of Olives, on top of a high mountain overlooking the city of Jerusalem below, from which many of the pictures you see on the internet are from the Mount of Olives overlooking the city below. But what happened? It says in verse 41, and when he was come near, that is Jesus, he beheld the city and wept over it. Now, there's another place in the Bible where it's recorded that Jesus cried. It's the verse that everybody likes to quote in camp. Would you mind standing up, young man, and saying a Bible verse? Oh, John 11:25. Jesus wept. We say it's the shortest verse in the Bible. It's not, but we say that. It's actually 1 Thessalonians 5:17 in the Greek language. That's the shortest verse. Pray without ceasing, because it contains less Greek letters than Jesus wept. Wept is a great big long word, okay? While everybody else is crying, climbing palm trees and cutting down leaves to lay Jesus not out a red carpet, because they believe he's going to enter Jerusalem and run the Romans out of town. Jesus stops in the middle of their jubilation and he starts to cry. Why in the world would Jesus cry? He cried earlier, a few months earlier, over his friend Lazarus. But now he's crying over a whole nation of people to whom he was sent, and they did not receive him, John 1:14. He was sent into his own, but his own received him not. Politically, they would be destroyed because they were subversiveness. They were always trying to kill every Roman soldier out by himself or a very few, and just like Barabbas, taken in the insurrection. And his two cohorts, they were captured among the many, perhaps who were trying to subvert the nation. But religiously, they were going to be destroyed because they didn't accept Jesus. And here's what he said. Verse 42, if you had known, even thou, and least thy day, the things which belong to thy peace, but now you're hid from your eyes. For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and thou shalt not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. On that day, Sunday afternoon, what did Jesus predict? The destruction of Jerusalem. You agree? He says it's going to be destroyed. And not only you, but the very people to whom I was sent, you're going to reject me as well. The same crowd that in a few moments will cry out, crown him, on Friday would cry out, crucify him. Isn't that sad how people's opinion of Jesus turned very quickly? Now Jesus rides in Jerusalem. Instead of running the Romans out, he runs the money changers, the ones who are making exorbitant fees over making God's house, his temple, a place of, instead of a place of prayer, a place of merchandise. Now, it is Tuesday afternoon. Every day in the temple, Jesus went to teach. On Tuesday, this is what he said back in Matthew chapter 23. Now, we're going to stay right there for a little while, so turn to Matthew chapter 23. And during the day teaching, here's what he said in Matthew chapter 23, beginning in verse 37. He said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth chickens under her wings, and you wouldn't do it. Behold, your house, Jerusalem, is left unto you desolate. How many of you remember out in, Joanna, where did we go in California? Up in the mountains, El Capitan? Yosemite National Park. How many of you remember it burned here a few years ago? You know the forest rangers going through all those mountains, and I mean it's just like Grundy, Virginia. You got a road, a river, and two mountains up like this, okay? And it's beautiful. And during that fire, they found one bird that had its wings stretched out, and it was crisp. But when they lifted those wings of that bird, they found underneath it chicks that were still alive. What a compassionate story. Jesus said, I was like a mother hen to you Jewish people. I was sent to you, and yet you didn't want me. But because they rejected Jesus, their house is going to be desolate. Second time in 2 days, Jesus has now predicted destruction in Jerusalem. Now he sits down to rest. It's been a long day of teaching. He watches some men come to the treasury up here, and he watches them throw big $1,000 bills in, we'd say. And then he watches a lady maybe on a crane, on a cane or a crutch walk up, and she just drops a penny in the offering plate. And Jesus remembers what she did. Makes a comment about it. Now Jesus gets up to do what he did every night of the week after Sunday, because Sunday night he spent the night in the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, whom he'd recently raised, as I said before, from the dead. But every other night he's tented out on top of the Mount of Olives. By the way, this is how Judas knew where to find him on Thursday night, to betray him with a kiss. Got that? Now Jesus gets up to go across the brook, leaves Jerusalem, goes on top of the Mount of Olives, and here's what happens in Matthew 24. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. Josephus, the Jewish writer, says it was a Disney World of its time. What a castle when you walk in Orlando, Florida, Kissimmee, Florida, and see that castle of Mickey and all the other creatures of Disneyland. Right? He says it was like a white castle ascending out. It was beautiful. But Jesus said when they showed him the buildings of the temple in verse 2, see not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be here left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now for the third time in 3 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so I guess we can say 3 times, what has Jesus again predicted? The destruction of Jerusalem. Now, I don't know if you women are like me. My wife says that I either don't hear or I have selective hearing, and I don't hear very well. But she says that the reason women talk 3 times as much as men is you have to repeat everything 3 times. And the women said, I hear it a little out from some of you. Some of you just smiling. But I got news for you. This time, the third time, they heard it. And as they followed Jesus along, like the mother hen with all the little chicks behind going on top of it, somebody ought to go ask Jesus what he meant. What do you mean this beautiful structure of God, the temple that Herod had built for the Jews, the Disneyland capital, is going to be leveled to the ground. Not one cinder block will be left in the whole city, much less the temple area. Somebody ought to ask him about that. And so 4 disciples come to Jesus on top of the Mount of Olives and ask him these 2 questions. And as he sat up on the Mount of Olives, you'll see it here in just a minute. There it is. Verse 3, and as he sat up on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him and said privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming into the world? If I told you tonight, as an outside man coming into this church for the very first time, this building is going to be leveled to the ground, you say, well, yeah, everything's going to be burned up at the second coming. You would associate this destruction of this building with the second coming, wouldn't you, when everything's going to be destroyed? But Jesus says, no, 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 no. I want to point out to you that these 2 questions on your sheet are only asked in Matthew. This is very important. It's one of the 3 proofs that I'm going to give you. These signs cannot, as the TV evangelists make you believe, refer to the second coming. These do not refer to the second coming. What's following refer only to, and only, I repeat again, and only, for the sake of emphasis, to the destruction of Jerusalem. Here's the second one, Mark chapter 13, the parallel to Matthew 24. And as he went out of the temple, one of the disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and buildings are here? And Jesus answering said unto them, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another, shall not be thrown down. And as he sat up on the Mount of Olives over against the temple, how many apostles? 4, I said. Here they are, the inner circle plus 1. Peter and James and John asked him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? What things? When there won't be one cinder block left standing in Jerusalem. And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? Where's the question about second coming? It's not there. That's important. Now look at Luke. Remember I told you that after teaching, Jesus saw the rich men cast their money in? Read it there. And he looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts in the treasury, and he saw a certain widow casting in 2 pennies. And he said, Of a truth I say to you, this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all those have given of their abundance. They gave it out of their checking account. But she, of her penny, hath cast, of her penary, that's her savings account, hath cast in all the living that she had. It's everything that she had. And as some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said, As for these things which ye behold, the days will come in which there shall not be left one stone upon another, shall not be thrown down. See the parallel? Matthew 24, Matthew 13, Luke 21. And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be, and what sign will there be when all these things shall be fulfilled? Where's the question about the second coming? Only Matthew records that. So at the top of your page, you have these 2 questions. Summarized by adding these together in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, here's the 2 questions. What are the signs for, and when is the destruction of Jerusalem? Jesus answers that question beginning in the next verse in Matthew chapter 24, down through verse 35. It's not until verse 36 that he begins to answer the second question, and that is, what are the signs for, and when is your second coming into the world? May I point out to you again, this is only asked by Matthew. So then, if we parallel these verses, how in the world can the TV evangelist make these signs in Matthew 24 refer to the second coming in Mark and Luke when that's not even a question being asked. It's like on the way down, I told my wife Joanne, I said, look at those cows over in the field. They've got horns on top of them, and they've got milkers underneath. And somebody said, prettiest horse I've ever seen in my life. Now, come on. That's not a horse, that's a cow, isn't it? Got those milkers? The young man knows the farmer's handshake, doesn't he? Well, I got news for you. This is exactly what the TV evangelists do. They try to take these signs that fit a cow and try to fit them on a horse of another second coming, and you cannot do it. I'll prove it to you from the text. So let's begin to answer the first question. Notice it has two parts, and not only does Jesus answer the first question, he answers them in the order of the two parts. Now, I didn't set this up. Have I ever met you, sir? Right here. Have I ever met you before tonight? Not. I didn't set anything up with you, right? What's your name and where do you work? Okay, but you still work. You're at home at your wife. But what's your name and where do you work? At home. Doing the honeydew jobs that never end, right? So I asked him two questions. In what order did he answer? The order they're asked. That's the way most people are going to do it, aren't they? Wouldn't you? So let's answer the first question. What are the signs for? So let's begin to read, and you fill your sheet in right here. In Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 5, Jesus said, verse 4, and take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So the first thing leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem will be false Christ. Now notice what you see on the screen. 3 little asterisks. Jesus mentions this sign 3 times. I have a little book. I found it in graduate school at Cincinnati Bible Seminary. It's no longer there. I guess they closed it down after I left, after many years. But it's Matthew chapter 24. It's out of print, so I made a copy of it. I've since lost it in all the stuff that I have stacked up in my office. But in this book, this author traces as many as 23 different men, all claiming to be a Messiah, much like Jesus, many of whom were crucified on crosses just like Jesus, leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. We even have a couple of these mentioned in the book of Acts. You remember Simon a sorcerer in Acts chapter 8 tried to buy the gift of God? Josephus says he claimed to be an almighty one. What's the name for God? The Almighty Father. Paul was arrested, mistaken for Theudas. Who in the world was Theudas in the book of Acts? Well, the important thing was that he came out of Egypt. Where would God's son be called out of? Egypt. And he led an insurrection. He was two recorded in the book of Acts of 20-some different messiahs. As we said, we know this came true. It's easily proven this happened leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. The second sign is in the next verse. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. I got news for you. If an Arab sneezes at a Jew in Jerusalem, there's going to be a war. The TV evangelist, every time some little thing happens over there, guess what? It's World War III, and we're going to, the whole thing. I get so tired of this. I even wrote letters to the paper in Bluefield. I remember when we invaded Iraq War when George Bush I was in office, and then George Bush II, and every time somebody, some preacher, so-claimed preacher, didn't study his Bible, would claim, oh, here it is, the Battle of Armageddon is going to happen. Well, I got news for you. Would you like to read the rest of this verse? For all these things must come to pass, but the end is, now what's the next word? Not yet. If you want to take these signs by what we call double reference prophecy and try to fit them to the second coming, guess what they prove? The opposite of what the TV evangelists want them to prove. The end is not yet. If you want to make the end there, the end of the world. But the end here is the end of Jerusalem, because it's going to be leveled to the ground by the Romans, and so hated they the Jews that they not only when they leveled it to the ground, they put salt over the city. Anybody know what happened to the Teslas in the recent hurricane down in Florida? When the salt got in those batteries of those cars, they burned up. I got news for you. Trees and things don't grow after the land has been overcovered by salt. They're going to have a whole lot of time trying to dig up all that salt stuff in Florida and get it back out in the ocean where it belongs. It happened in New Orleans during Katrina. You see, Thessalonians says this. When everybody says peace and safety, sounds like it's a time of peace, not a time of war when the second coming occurs. You see, the end here is Jerusalem, not the end of the world, but if it is, what does it disprove? The end is not yet. Not that it's going to happen next week. Jesus is going to come, whatever. And then he says in verse 9, I'm sorry, I skipped it, I'm sorry. In verse 7, for nation shall rise against nation, saying the same thing, and kingdom against kingdom, wars and rumors of wars, and there shall be famines. Now, what's a famine? People have a lack of food. Why did the Apostle Paul write 1 Corinthians 16:2? Anybody know what it says? Let there be no offerings when I come. He delivered this offering to the apostles and church at Jerusalem. Why? Because they were experiencing one of the famines predicted right here by Jesus' own lips. We know it was fulfilled. Agabus the prophet stood up and predicted in the book of Acts. Paul Harvey would say, have you read the rest of the chapter? You know, some of you young people don't know who Paul Harvey was. Ask your mama. She'll tell you. So we know this took place. And then pestilences. What's a pestilence? Now, you wives, quit looking at your husbands. A pestilence would be swarms of insects like mosquitoes that bring the Nile virus. We have a record of these in that book called Matthew 24. We know how many people died in them throughout the Roman Empire before 70 A.D. And then again, and earthquakes. So we got the pestilences, number 4, and then the earthquakes, number 5. Now, we know of an earthquake in 64 A.D., before 70 A.D., that leveled Laodicea to the ground. I'll mention this Sunday morning in our morning message, but the first thing the mayor of Laodicea did was call FEMA and said, don't show up. We're so filthy rich, we'll rebuild our own city with our own money. And they did. They were filthy rich. So we know of an earthquake that took place that leveled Laodicea. Philadelphia is like California. Located on the coast, there's going to be one of those earthquakes out there. There was one this week. And that's the one we hear about, the biggies. You go out there and it shakes all the time out in California. But they say there's the biggie. And pretty soon the west coast is going to be Arizona. That San Andreas fault. You know, it goes up. Y'all seen The Rock in that movie, San Francisco, you know all about it. Well, I got news for you. Every time an earthquake happens, somebody's going to predict that this second coming has nothing to do with it. He says in verse 9, all these are the, would you say it with me? The beginning of sorrows. I point out to you again, the context is if you want to misapply these to the second coming, it's just the start of troubles, not the end of them. That's not the end of the world, it's just the start of troubles yet to come. So you see, the context would teach you that if you want to apply these by mistake to the second coming, the end is not yet. These are just the beginning of sorrows. Sign number 6. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall arise and deceive many. And because iniquity abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. This is the end of his life. Now, do we know that religious persecution took place before 70 A.D.? Well, you don't have to read very far in the book of Acts. And you see Philip pulled over by a police officer driving his chariot in a 25-mile-an-hour Jerusalem zone, and he was doing 70 miles an hour. I mean, they shot him on the spot. Is that how Stephen died? No, Stephen was killed for one reason. He is the first Christian martyr. But before 70 AD comes, Nero took the children. In 1 month, he slaughtered 20,000 Christians in 1 month in the arena at Rome by dressing even small children up in the skins of wild animals, kept the lions away from food for a while, turned them loose, and they tore them to shreds. Under the city of Rome, if you visit today, you'll go into catacombs. Under the city of Rome today are 2 to 7 million graves of Christians, starting with Nero, who buried them under the city of Rome. And that happened before 70 AD. But sign number 7, verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Has that ever been done? Do you know, without a doubt, this is the one of the other 6 signs that are absolutely recorded in the Scriptures as being fulfilled. Here are just 4 places: Romans 1:8, Romans 10:18, Colossians 1:6, and 1:23. 4 places that the Apostle Paul uses the same phraseology as here from the lips of Jesus. The gospel will be preached to the whole world before the destruction of Jerusalem. And it was. Without the aid of a microphone, without the aid of buildings, the first century Christians did what we can't do with all the technology that we have in our smartphone. Do you know there's more technology in that right there than got us on the moon? I hate for a blonde to own a smartphone, don't you? The young man who did our sound for us tonight, he said, "You got a smartphone?" I said, "Well, it may be smart, but I'm not. I don't know how to use it all." But I got news for you. The first century Christians did what Jesus said. They remembered his last words, the last words of a dying man: go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. And they did it before 70 AD. Now, if you were a Jew, all of us tonight gathered here were Jews, and we were living during this time period from 33 AD to 70 AD, when we know Jerusalem was leveled to the ground by the Romans. Would you know that the destruction of Jerusalem was going to happen? Nope. Why? Because these are just the start of bad things. Right? They're just the beginning of sorrows. But at least we've answered the first half of the first question, hadn't we? What's the second part of the first question? What are the signs for and? Well, guess what the next word is in the text? When, verse 15, therefore you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Whosoever reads, let him understand. Stand in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Now my question to you is, what in the world is the abomination of desolation? He said you can know Jerusalem's going to be destroyed when you see it's going to happen. Well, we see verse 15, that's a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 9. But that really doesn't help us, does it? Well, there are some other verses that might. Let's read Mark, the parallel verse. Mark 13:14. When you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of in the prophets, standing where it ought not to be, let him read and understand. Well, I don't understand that, do you? When I hear the word abomination, what do you think of? Same thing I do. That's snowman, right? The abominable snowman. Why do we call the snowman abominable? Because he's supposed to be, look like Kyle over there or me. No wonder it scares people. What would be the most abominable thing for a Jew? To have his temple desecrated. And that's exactly what Luke 21:20 explains to us. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Jerusalem had been besieged many times before, but was it this time what was going to happen. The fourth time, Jesus is now going to tell you, listen up, Jerusalem's going to be leveled to the ground. Not one cinder block is going to be left in the city. You got it? Now, tonight, if we during our break, some of you said, well, I may have to go outside for a second, and you saw a great big bear out there, rawr, abominable looking, what would you do? What would you do? Run. Where? Back in here, right? But what if this building's on fire? Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. The natural thing to do when you see an army approaching from the outside is to run back inside the city. What's that got to do with the second coming? Nothing. But if you're living in Jerusalem and the suburbs and the trumpet here blows the warning, an enemy is approaching, what's the natural thing to do? Run inside the burning building. That's stupid. All you'd have to do is say, Rick, would you mind coming out here? That bear would have plenty to eat, and I can't run very far. You better take your chances. That's why what he says next. Then which you be upon the housetop, then which you DJ, flee into the mountains. Don't run back inside the city. Don't come down and rent a rider truck. Take the clothes that are on your back, get out of town. How about if you're outside hoeing in the garden spot? You've rented a piece of land outside of town. Neither that which is in the field return back, take his clothes. Why? Because by the time you go and pack your clothes and you load up all the furniture in your house, you get back to the city gate, they're not going to open it to let you out, because if they open it to let who in? The army that's surrounding the city. Luke 21:20. That is the fulfillment of Daniel 9:24 through 27. That's the first answer that Jesus is going to give. And then he says, and woe to them that are with child. Now, I can't do it here because I had a heart valve put in last couple of years ago during COVID. I can't breathe very well in spite of the fact that I had this aortic valve replaced. But I do look like I am pregnant. Now, what's that got to do if you're pregnant at the second coming or not? Nothing. But my question to you is, if you're running from an army down the road, do you think they're going to stop and let you rest because you're carrying that extra baby in here? Do you think they're going to stop and let you breastfeed that baby on the side of the road? Woe to them to give suck? No. And then he said, why in the world would they attack on the Sabbath day? Can't you see the Roman commander? Here's this group of Jews that go running down the road on the Sabbath day. Why would the Romans attack on the Sabbath? For the same reason the Japanese attacked us on Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. It was our day of worship. And how far could a religious Jew travel on the Sabbath day? 3/4 of a mile, so to speak. He said, don't worry about them. You'll see them 3/4 of a mile down the road. And pray that your flight be not in the winter. What's that got to do with the second coming? But if Russia, Putin, were to attack us, would you rather be in June or right now when the snow's coming? You got it? This is all in reference to destruction of Jerusalem. Now watch what happens next. For then, verse 21, shall be great tribulation. How many of you have ever heard of it? 7 years of great tribulation. Well, I got news for you here. You'll never find that phrase in the Bible anywhere. The TV evangelists try to make it from Daniel chapter 7. It won't fit. But the great tribulation here was that God's people, Jesus cried over them. Do you realize within 40 years, 1 million people would die inside that city? These were God's people whom he sent. And what did they do? They rejected him. What happened was, when the city was slammed shut by the army surrounding the city, they attacked it during a feast. They not only got the troublesome bees in Jerusalem, they got all the hornets from all over the Roman Empire that were trying to run Romans out. Now, when the convention's in town, what have you got to have? You got to have plenty of food, don't you? Right? Well, when they shut the thing up, the warring factions inside the city divided into cliques, and each other burnt down each other's Kroger stores. Now, that's smart, isn't it? Burn down the supplies. It got so bad during this siege that lasted 3.5 years, from 67 to 70 A.D., that anytime anybody would smell anybody cooking food, they would break the door down. On this one occasion, they break the door down, recorded by Josephus. The Jewish Henry Kissinger from outside the city, trying to get the Jews to surrender. As a representative from the Romans, please convince them to surrender the city. I won't destroy their temple if they will, but they wouldn't surrender. And they couldn't do it anyhow, because Jesus said every cinder block's going to be destroyed, and it was. But when they broke the door down, they found that a lady had cooked her own baby, cut it in half, planned to eat half of her baby one night and the other half the second night. At one gate alone, there were 600,000 stinking, rotting bodies stacked up. Josephus writes that when the Romans did get inside the city, that blood flowed like river in the streets. That was the Great Tribulation. Now, if you happen to be living in that time period during that siege, would you not grab on to any glimmer of hope? Now, these verses coming up, everybody says Jesus switches to the second question. I refute that. Jesus is not switching to the second question, but to stop, as he often did, and refute the false teaching that he's going to come back during the siege of Jerusalem and save the Jewish nation. How many of you have heard God's going to play favorites with the Jews again? Jerry Falwell, when he was alive, actually said that God doesn't hear a Jew's prayer. Well, now that sort of goes against the theology of that particular church that believes that God's going to play favorites with the second coming, because he's going to set up a 1,000-year reign where Judaism is going to be restored, with Jesus reigning on the earth as a Saddam Hussein of the future. And he had to get on national television and apologize to the chief rabbi in Washington, D.C. before he died. So let's see what he says. In verse 23, then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. I call these, in these verses, I call these the very dumb and the very smart false prophets. For the third time, we're back to them. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, shall say great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the Lord very late. Behold, I've told you beforehand, but you won't listen. Wherefore if they shall say unto you, Behold, he's in the desert, don't go out there. Behold, he's in the secret chamber, don't believe it. Now you see the two kinds of false prophets? The first one is very dumb. He said, hey, gather around. I know you're about to starve to death. You hadn't had enough food in your belly. I mean, you've lost weight. It's obviously by looking at all, you lost weight. But I got great news. You remember when Jesus taught out there on the mountainside, the Sermon on the Mount? I was asleep last night. My belly hurt so bad from a lack of food. I woke up and Jesus appeared to me and said, I'm out there in the wilderness. Come follow me. And here's all these people grasping on to any glimmer of hope that they can be saved during this siege, and they're going to go out through the gate. And right before they get ready to leave, sneaking out one of the gates, the little boy raised his hand, but mister, how are we going to get past the Romans out there? Don't worry, son. If Scotty can beam them up, Jesus will make us invisible, son, and we'll just go out there and meet Jesus in the desert. And out they go. They get within 100 yards of the wall. The Romans surround them, crucify them on so many crosses that to this day, if you visit Jerusalem, you won't find any wood. because they crucified so many people outside the city, surrounding this city. Can you not see your mother, your brother, who was deceived by this false teacher? Help me, help me, help me. It was sad. Now the other guy, he's watching on the wall, the other fellow, he's not that dumb. Hey, come follow me, Jesus in my back bedroom. And I'm sure they went to the house and there was this veil over this back room, a candle back there. Oh, I know you're suffering bad, but don't worry, brethren. My yoke is easy, my burden to bear. Come follow me. Now, what are these false teachers both teaching? The same thing the TV evangelists teach today. You ever heard of the secret rapturing away of the church? Huh? If you have, you're going to the next session. They teach that all of a sudden this airplane's flying along in the Tim LaHaye series. We'll mention next time, and Jesus comes and rescues those people right in the midst when the airplane's going to crash. And all of a sudden the pilot's gone, and how in the world are they going to land? I don't know. But the secret rapturing away of the church. Got news for you. Jesus hadn't switched to the second coming, but they're teaching the same thing. Jesus came back and you missed him. It's what the Seventh-day Adventists say. 1844, Jesus came to the earth, and you just missed him. I got news for you. Revelation 1:5 contradicts that, and so will Jesus in this text. Every eye shall see him. You know, Adam and Eve will see Jesus coming back. You'll be able to recognize them if you look close because they don't have any belly buttons. Now, you think I'm kidding, don't you? They didn't need belly buttons, did they? They weren't born like babies because they were created. Now, God could have created them with any reality, I don't know. But every eye will see him. Even the soldier that pierced his side is going to see Jesus coming back. So this is what Jesus is going to say. He's not switching to the second question. He's refuting the fact that when he comes back, everybody's going to see him. Here it is, verse 27. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even in the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. I guarantee you, if we were sitting in here tonight, even these lights on, and a big thunder came up here and lightning happened, we'd all see it, wouldn't we? That's what Jesus' second coming is going to be like. Every eye is going to see him. For whithersoever the carcass is, most people say this is the Jewish nation. The International says, version, thither will the vultures be gathered together. That's important for next session. Now turn over on the back of your sheet. I want to show you just how open the second coming is. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. In this chapter are listed 4 of 7 signs that are not leading up to the second coming, but signal that the second coming is occurring. The first of these, an earthquake. The sun turned to darkness, the moon turned to blood, stars fall. You'll no longer have the Big Dipper, you'll have the Big Slipper because it's moving. The world as we know it is being destroyed. There is only one place in the Bible, and you'll see it tomorrow night, that 6 of these are listed together, and that's in Revelation 6:12. The heavens departing as the scroll, mountains and islands move out of places. I taught this book probably when Kyle was at school. Probably by 90s I had realized that God loves 7s, not 6s. And that there is a 7th event of how God is going to destroy the world at the second coming. And not only the world, I mean the universe. Because the sun, moon, and stars are all affected, there's going to be a worldwide fire. Now, this is a theory of mine. I have to do this quickly because I'll mess you up and I'll miss my time. How did God destroy the world the first time? By water. Where did that water come from? Not only came down for 40 days and 40 nights, but also came up. You ever driving along and you see rocks laying at an angle? You know why that happened? That's part of the effects of the flood. All the water under the earth God caused to come to the top of the earth. You ever wonder why they find dinosaur bones on top of mountains? Because as the waters went up, guess where the dinosaurs went? That's why you always find them at the top. Guess where they found fossils? On the highest mountains. Down in our area, my house sits at 2,300 feet above sea level, and I could climb on top of the highest mountain down in Bluefield and find fossils. We found them on our campus. How in the world could the water have been covered? Shells, just like in the sea. How's that possible? Because the water covered every mountaintop. So no wonder you'd find the fossils of bones on tops of mountains in the highest part. I believe if God could use what's under the earth the first time to destroy the world, guess what he can do the second time? Guess what's below the water? Well, just get on your TV and get on your YouTube like your services are and type in Hawaii and that volcano. Guess what that is? All that is that steam coming up from beneath all the water, and the core of the earth is magma. I'm not saying that's how God's going to do it, but God could simply have volcanoes all over the world coming up everywhere, and he could burn this world up. Tomorrow night we're going to introduce you to, in the introduction to Revelation, firemen and angels, and they're in here to put them out. They're here to set them on fire, because the whole world, as we know, is going to be destroyed by fire. Now, does that sound like a secret to you? If that weren't enough, he says, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. You know what that trumpet does? It brings Jimmy Hoffa out of a slab of concrete. It brings every graveyard that I passed on the way down here. It'll be emptied out. The people on the USS Arizona that went down December 7, 1921, those men are going to come up out of that ocean. Even the sea will give up its dead. That's what that trumpet does. Read 1 Corinthians 15. Does that sound like a secret to you? And everybody's going, wonder what's happening here. I got news for you. I'll tell you what's happening. These are not signs that signal that the second coming is tomorrow, the next day, or next week, or next month, next year. These are signs that accompany the second coming, not precede it. Does that sound like a secret? Absolutely not. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and put forth leaves, you know summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when you shall see all these things, let me get them back here, those 7 things. When you see all of that, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. What is a biblical generation? By the time most of you were 40 years old, guess what you had? A kid. That's the new generation. A biblical generation is about 40 years. Did Jesus' statement come true? He said, heaven and earth shall pass away, verse 35, but my words shall not pass away. Did Jesus' statement come true? Within 40 years, would they see the army destroying Jerusalem? Well, let's get the West Virginia calculator out here. If you can't do that on your own, get your smartphone out and go to your calculator. 70 AD minus 33 AD is 37 years. My question to you is, did Jesus know when destruction of Jerusalem was? Yes! He gave you 7 signs for it and said it will be within the next 40 years. It will fulfill Daniel chapter 9, be the abomination of desolation. But would you read the next verse with me? And then we'll pause. But of that day and hour knows no man. Do you see this and that? If I say this pew, but that woman sitting on the back row back there, one's near, one's far. These are called in the English language near and far demonstrative pronouns. Jesus knew when destruction of Jerusalem was, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now do you see the switch to the second question? Do you see it? But of that day and hour knows no man. No, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now we're going to stop right here, and we're going to come to the second coming of Matthew 24. And what I'm going to share with you is that for every sign Jesus told you, here are signs leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, Jesus will tell you 7 more times, plainly or in parables, you cannot know when the second coming is. Now I'm going to start on this first one, then we'll quit. But of that day and hour knows no man. What day and hour? We switch to the second question. When is the second coming? What are the signs for? And when is the second coming in the world? No man knows. Now let me ask you a question. The TV evangelists are always quoting from the Old Testament prophets, Zechariah, Malachi, all these Old Testament prophets. Did any of them, or were all of them men? Please say yes. Do they know when the second coming is? How about Matthew, Mark, Luke, John? The Apostle Paul, Peter, James, Jude. All wrote the 27 books of the New Testament. They're all men, right? Did any of them know when the second coming is? No. How about an angel? In 1988, there was a book at Walmart. You could purchase it. 88 Reasons Why Jesus Must Come by 1988. You can go on your web, get on Amazon, you could buy it. But I got news for you, it's outdated. Based upon a false interpretation, now proved wrong, the Jewish nation became a nation in 1948, May of 1948. Well, at 40 years would make 48 plus 40, 1988. How many of you remember Pat Robinson? National television. Well, if the coming of Jesus to reign on the earth is 1988, 7 years before that, because you got 7 years of tribulation in between, you had to have Jesus come and rapture the church away, according to them. So all during 1980, guess what he preached? Better get your bags packed, Pat Robinson said, because Jesus is coming back to rapture his people away. Well, January the 1st, 1982, he had to get on national television and explain why Jesus didn't rapture you away. And you know what he said? God did not foresee Russia invading Afghanistan, so thereby he changed the date of the rapture. Look it up. Go on YouTube and you'll find out what I'm saying is true. But worse than that, do any of you have 3 other words that I have not read in the King James Version? If I were to pull out under here, or in Mark 13:32, it's in both, whether it's Westcott and Hort translation of the Greek text or the Nestle's text. There are 3 words that occur in the New International Matthew 24. And all, whether it's Westcott and Hort or the Nestle's text, now that's over your head, but it's simply saying these 2 sets of manuscripts go up and down as to which one is the better group of manuscripts to trust. But there are 3 words in that text that are in the New International. They're in the King James Version, all of your translations. Would you like me to read it from the New International? Matthew 24, verse 36. When it says here, I got to find verse, no one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels of heaven. 3 words, help me. Nor the Son. Who's that? That's Jesus, isn't it? I got a question to ask you. I'd love to ask Jerry Falwell this because I heard him preach on this text. And he said all those 7 things that we listed on your sheet of paper on the front, those were signs of the second coming. Now, the Indians had a word for a man who talks like that. Now, you're not listening over here. This side, you just stick your fingers in here. Here are 7 signs for the second coming. You're quiet now. You're not listening. But I don't know what it is. Isn't that preposterous? This is the 3rd proof in the text that these cannot be signs for the second coming because Jesus, when he was on the earth, I believe now in heaven, my personal opinion, doesn't know when he's coming back. I will end this session the way I began. There are no signs for the second coming whereby any man can discover when it is. It is both heaven's and earth's best kept secret, because only the Father in heaven knows when it is. Guess where I found that at? Matthew 24, verse 36. Only the Father in heaven is one day going to tap his hand on the shoulder of Jesus and say, today, son, is your day to go. I'll give you 6 more proofs after we come back. Ladies, thank you very much for fixing our refreshments. You have 15 minutes to get in there and grab them and growl and get back in here. But before you go, we're going to ask my good friend over here, Kyle, to have our prayer and thanks for the food. And if I start yelling, "Soo-wee!" y'all come back in.
God, thank you for this time together. Thank you for Rick and his wife coming up here and for the word he's presenting to us. We pray that you would bless this food we're about to eat, nourish it to our bodies.
My wife, Joanne.